Good evening, welcome to Scotland at 7. It's the 17th of June today. And now today's coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,135,228 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these, 1,884,267 have been confirmed negative. 250,961 have tested positive. There are 1,317 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display the symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 4 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who've died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,688. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 140 were in hospital last night, 12 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 3,571,726 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,516,066 people had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 127,945 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. This is an increase of 19 since yesterday, and this number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now to tonight's main headlines and increasing the capacity for drug services. An additional £14.4 million will be invested in frontline services to help more people into treatment and to help tackle Scotland's drugs deaths emergency. The funding is part of the £50 million already pledged to address the drugs deaths this year. It will include money to help implement new treatment standards that will ensure everyone gets the same level of treatment regardless of where they live in Scotland. Other investments announced today include an extra £13.3 million for alcohol and drugs partnerships, including funding to improve services for children and families, another £1 million to support third sector initiatives, and £1 million on establishing a lived and living experience forum and for maintaining existing panels. There's a further £800,000 for a campaign to tackle the stigma around drugs use. £1.5 million is being made available for public health surveillance, evaluation, monitoring and research. Today's allocations are in addition to the £18 million already committed to 4 separate funds to improve drug services, meaning that the full £50 million has now been allocated for this year. The Drugs Policy Minister, Angela Constance, said, "This announcement sets out how the £50 million additional funding announced for this year will be spent on improving and saving lives, and it's vital that those working on the front line have the necessary resources to meet the needs of drug users who seek help and their families. Much of the additional funding I've announced will support alcohol and drug partnerships and third sector organisations to develop their workforce and improve capacity." Now, a balanced budget has been achieved despite the pandemic's pressures. Despite unprecedented challenges presented by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection, the Scottish budget was balanced last year. The 2020-2021 provisional budget outturn shows that 99% of the £48 billion budget was spent, meaning that the Scottish Government has fulfilled its legal obligation to deliver a balanced budget. The remaining 1% will be carried over to 2021-22 to help support the pandemic recovery, with every penny allocated in full. This will ensure the Scottish Government is able to implement measures in response to coronavirus at the most optimal time, rather than being constrained to a single financial year. The Public Finance Minister, Tom Arthur, said, "Last year has brought unprecedented challenges to public spending in Scotland. We've made significant investment to protect communities, to support health and social services, including running the largest vaccination programme the country has ever seen, and over £3 billion in support for businesses. Despite these challenges, strong financial management has enabled us to deliver a balanced budget, whilst investing in the services and support required to help the country to get through the pandemic." Now, Audit Scotland has published its PPE report. An Audit Scotland briefing published today looks at how the Scottish Government and NHS National Services Scotland put in place arrangements to procure, store and distribute PPE to health and social care settings. This was at a time when global supply chains collapsed and the market for PPE was complex and volatile. Stephen Boyle, the Auditor General for Scotland, said that the Scottish Government and the NHS National Services Scotland worked well together under extremely challenging circumstances to set up new arrangements for the supply and distribution of PPE to health and social care settings. Mr. Boyle pointed out that the challenge will now be in developing a longer-term approach to PPE supply and distribution, which includes both business as usual needs as well as preparing for future pandemics. Mary Morgan, the Chief Executive of NHS National Service Scotland, NSS, welcomed the publication of this Audit Scotland report. She said that the report recognises the crucial role played by NSS in ensuring that Scotland never ran out of critical PPE at any point during the pandemic. Ms Morgan said that the NSS national procurement teams worked 24/7 to overcome unprecedented global demand and the collapse of the international supply chains, working with partners to develop new supply routes to support social care colleagues and to make direct deliveries to ensure primary care teams received their essential supplies, emphasising that decisions taken in the spring of 2020 had to be made urgently to reduce the risk of our NHS being overwhelmed. Ms Morgan said, "This key responsibility to protect public health and preserve life shaped the decisions that had to be taken against the backdrop of a fast-developing global pandemic. They were based upon NSS colleagues' experience and deep knowledge of the Scottish, UK and international supply landscape." And now to rather worse news, I'm afraid, today, and Pladis is planning redundancies. Employees at the McVitie's factory in Tollcross in Glasgow have received notification from Pladis that their jobs are at risk, as the company is considering moving production to factories in England and making the Glasgow staff redundant. Responding to the news, the Economy Secretary, Kate Forbes, said, "This is really disappointing news, and my thoughts are with those affected and their families. This will be a very anxious and distressing time for them, especially during these uncertain times, and we stand ready to provide support." The Pladis Action Group has met frequently to discuss what could be done to save the site and the jobs. And just last week, we presented a series of proposals as an alternative to site closure. We're therefore extremely disappointed Pladis has decided to notify staff that they're at risk of redundancy. The Action Group is meeting again next week, where we will carefully consider the next steps and what more we can do to support affected staff and to secure these jobs. I would once again ask Pladis to engage directly with the Action Group to explore opportunities to secure a future for the site. And now to other news. Alcohol sales fell to a 26-year low in 2020. Overall alcohol consumption in Scotland fell to a 26-year low during 2020, according to a comprehensive report published today by Public Health Scotland. The annual Monitoring and Evaluating Scotland's Alcohol Strategy, or MESA's report, brings together data on alcohol consumption, price and related harms into a single publication. It shows that total alcohol sales fell 5% on the previous year, to the lowest level recorded since 1994. Last year, COVID-19 restrictions affected alcohol sales from premises such as pubs, clubs and restaurants. 9 in every 10 units of alcohol sold in Scotland in 2020 were sold via the off-trade outlets, including supermarkets and other off-licences. An increase from 7 in 10 units in An increase from 7 in every 10 units in 2019. In addition to the evidence from 2020, the year of the pandemic, today's MESAS report also details a 10% year-on-year reduction in the number of deaths wholly caused by alcohol in 2019. A previously published report from Public Health Scotland in March of 2021 shows that the introduction of minimum unit pricing, or MUP, in Scotland was associated with a net reduction in per adult off-trade alcohol sales of 2% in Scotland in the 12 months following the implementation. Public Health Scotland will publish further findings on consumption and harm to health in due course. The complete findings will be reported in 2023. In 2020, 64% of the pure alcohol sold in Scotland was recorded as being sold at between 50 pence and 64 pence per unit, compared to 32% before minimum unit pricing was implemented. Now, on the same subject, on the topic of drink, the United States has removed whisky tariffs. The United Kingdom and United States have today agreed to resolve a long-running trade dispute over aid to the aircraft manufacturers Airbus and Boeing, and to focus on tackling Chinese subsidies, echoing a 5-year tariff truce announced earlier this week between Washington and Brussels. Together, the matching deals draw a line under the 17 years of battles at the World Trade Organization and establish a common front against non-market funding, in a reference to China's nascent aerospace industry. The dispute had triggered a transatlantic tariff war hitting industries such as Scotch whisky, until a temporary tariff ceasefire was called this year to ease negotiations. SNP MP David Linden has welcomed the removal of US trade tariffs on Scotch whisky after a cross-party campaign led by the SNP, but criticises the Tory government for dragging its feet on finding a solution. According to global spirits brand Beam Suntory, losses to Scotch whisky exports have reached £600 million following US tariffs. Mr. Linden, the chair of the APPG on Scotch whisky, went to Washington, D.C. in February 2020 to lobby US congressional colleagues as a part of a cross-party campaign to remove the tariffs on Scotch whisky. And now the UK government is laying the foundations for another Brexit betrayal. The SNP today warned that only independence can protect Scotland's businesses and consumers from long-term damage of Brexit, after the Tory government was challenged over the impact of its trade deal with Australia. Responding to the Trade Secretary's statement in the House of Commons today, the SNP's Shadow International Trade Secretary, Drew Hendry MP, said that Scotland is increasingly vulnerable under Westminster control. Mr Hendry warned that it's clear that the only way to keep Scotland safe from long-term damage of Brexit and Tory trade deals is to become an independent country. The Inverness MP said, "For all the bluster, the Tory government knows that any trade deal with Australia won't even make a dent on the shortfall created by the trading disaster of leaving the EU. The simple fact is that we're doing much less trade now than before January the 1st. This deal will take 15 years to deliver a 200th of the benefits lost from EU membership." Mr Hendry pointed out that just this month, 14 of Scotland's food and drink organisations wrote to the UK government, saying that they have been ignored by this government, and there are growing concerns that the UK government is laying the foundations for yet another Brexit betrayal of Scotland's key industries, just like it did with the fishing communities. Whilst the UK government talk up importing swimwear from Australia, Scotland's farmers, crofters, producers and manufacturers know that they are being dragged underwater by another Westminster government that simply doesn't care, said Mr Hendry. And now to issues in Northern Ireland, and the DUP's Given has become Northern Ireland's First Minister. Paul Given of the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, replaced Arlene Foster as Northern Ireland's First Minister today, after averting a fresh political crisis that threatened to lead to a snap election. Given, who is 39, is a close ally of the new DUP leader, Edwin Poots. He needed to secure the consent of Sinn Féin, the DUP's main partners in Northern Ireland's power-sharing government, to take the post. Sinn Féin insisted the nomination be accompanied by the implementation of the cultural elements of a political agreement struck last year, and the parties agreed as a means to do so in talks late last night. And now back to the United States, and the US Supreme Court has rejected a Trump-backed challenge to Obamacare. The US Supreme Court has today rejected the Republican bid that had been backed by ex-President Donald Trump's administration to invalidate Obamacare, preserving the landmark healthcare law for the third time since its 2010 enactment. The 7-2 ruling declared that Texas and other challengers had no legal standing to file their lawsuit seeking to nullify a law formerly called the Affordable Care Act that has enabled millions of Americans to obtain medical coverage either through public programs or private insurers. The decision was authored by a Liberal Justice, Stephen Breyer. President Biden, whose administration opposed the lawsuit, tweeted that it was a big win for the American people, adding that millions of people rely on the law for healthcare coverage, while encouraging others to sign up. The law was former President Barack Obama's signature domestic policy achievement and was supported by Joe Biden, who served as vice president under Obama. Breyer wrote that none of the challengers, including Texas and 17 other states and individual plaintiffs, could trace a legal injury to the individual mandate, partly because the Republican-backed tax law signed by Trump in 2017 had wiped out the financial penalty. After Texas and other states sued, a coalition of 20 states, including Democrat-governed California and New York, and the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, intervened in the case to try to preserve Obamacare after Trump refused to defend the law. For more than a decade, the Affordable Care Act has been the law of the land, providing health coverage and a multitude of protections to tens of millions of Americans across the nation. And today's decision solidifies those protections for generations to come, said New York Attorney General Letitia James, a Democrat. Conservative Justices Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch dissented from the ruling. Alito wrote that the individual mandate was clearly unconstitutional and called the court's ruling of preserving the law an example of judicial inventiveness. In 2012 and 2015, the Supreme Court also fended off previous Republican challenges to Obamacare. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump appointee whose confirmation hearing last fall included many questions from Democrats over whether she would vote to strike down the law, was in the majority in the ruling. In February, the Biden administration urged the Supreme Court to uphold Obamacare, reversing the position taken by the government under Trump, who left office in January. Now to the environment, and the Environment Minister marks Clean Air Day. To mark Clean Air Day, Environment Minister Mary McCallum has confirmed the resumption of work on Scotland's low emission zones, or LEZs, after it was paused due to the pandemic. This meets one of the Scottish Government's commitments for the first 100 days of the new government. The Minister for the Environment, Biodiversity and Land Reform, Mary McCallum, said that improving air quality and in turn the health of our people and planet is an urgent priority for the Scottish Government, and they're taking action across the board to deliver this. Ms McCallum said, "We are continuing to work to deliver Scotland's low emission zones, which will provide real benefits for thousands of people in Scotland's cities. In busy areas, they will reduce nitrogen oxides emissions by as much as 3/4, and that's a significant step forward for the well-being of our communities and environment." We'll soon also publish our updated air quality strategy, setting out how Scotland can achieve the best air quality in Europe. To make that happen, we need more people to make the switch from cars to active travel and public transport, in line with the easing of COVID restrictions. That's why we're committed to reducing motor vehicle kilometres by 20% by 2030. And that is backed by new funding of over £500 million over 5 years for active travel infrastructure, access to bikes and behaviour change schemes. We're also investing £500 million in funding in bus priority infrastructure to tackle the negative impacts of congestion on bus services, including a positive alternative to the car. And that is about it from the news tonight. But let me just remind you that, of course, Broadcasting Scotland is running a crowdfunder at the moment. So if you enjoy our programmes and you'd like to see us make more of them, and you'd like us to help employ more journalists to make these programmes, you can do so by becoming a regular contributor, by becoming a regular supporter, and simply just by following the instructions on your screen now. You can also make individual donations, or you can volunteer. But that's it from me here in the studio tonight. I'll see you again next week. But from the studio tonight, a very good evening to you.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, "Oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama," you know, no, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was balanced on. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
About the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.